BeTheTalk, episode 364, featuring Nadya Zhexembayeva. Welcome to BeTheTalk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Nadya Zhexembayeva. Nadya, are you ready to talk?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva is a business owner, educator, speaker, and author specializing in reinvention. Nadya helped such organizations as the Coca-Cola Company, IBM, CISCO, Erste Bank, and many others to reinvent their products, processes, and leadership practices. I'm going to add she is now a 4-time TEDx speaker and graduated from the same college that I did, Case Western Reserve University. So it is so wonderful to have Nadya Zhexembayeva on the talk today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Very excited about our conversation.
You are originally from Kazakhstan in the former USSR. You grew up in the 70s, and you were part of that generation where some of the atrocities and the scary things, by your own admission, had ended, and yet we weren't in this new former Soviet state. And you talk about, I know that from watching your other talks, just for context, but I love what you say in your talk, which is called the one that I'm looking at right now, the Titanic syndrome, why companies sink and how to reinvent your way out of any disaster. You say that reinvention is the key to sustainability. And when we actually choose to proactively reinvent ourselves, then we earn the right to choose who we want to be in the future. I think it's wonderful. Please, Nadya, take us behind the talk.
Well, for me, the whole transformation from reinvention, from sustainability to reinvention took about 15 years. I am by education and in terms of practice, I'm not an environmental scientist. I'm a business scientist. Mm-hmm. And it was a question for me, how do we help companies understand survival in a language that doesn't feel like guilt or punishment or limitation, but language that gives business excitement, gives them inspiration, gives them pragmatic tools. So Titanic syndrome was a way to scare, and reinvention is the way to uplift. And I truly believe that the thought we used to have, that reinvention is something that is surface, very vain, is a flawed thought. Absolute majority of the world moves forward through reinvention, not innovation. That's why I'm championing this word.
Yeah, well, and I just think that you have such a matter-of-fact way of getting directly down to the heart of things and really marrying the environmental issues that we all know that we're in with business sustainability practices and even just some really common sense things that no one had ever laid out for me before. One real nugget that I'm taking away is you talk about the business cycle. I mean, why is it that our grandparents here in the United States, expect us to work at the same job for the rest of our lives, and we don't work at the same job? It's because the life cycle went from 75 years per your talk at the turn of the last century or 100 years ago. At the turn of this century, all of a sudden it's only 15 years, and now it's 7 years. And you take that and you say that there's a half-life. So if you're on the first 7 year, the first part, that's 3.5 years, it's going to go up. And then on the last 3.5 years, it's going to go down. And we could probably extract an even shorter half-life from there. You've been able to lay these things out in a very common sense way to make really a very empowering point to me and everyone else listening, which my takeaway is, hey, it's not my fault. There's nothing wrong with me. I have to change the way that we think because I'm living on a different planet, a different point in time than my grandfather was.
And for many of the young people listening, and by young, I include myself, I consider myself still young, anywhere until 50. Let's put it in the young category. But any of you listening who have bosses who grew up and developed their leadership practice in the 20th century, you're probably feeling that pressure as well, because these are wonderful, amazing, very experienced individuals who are trying to impart wisdom, but that wisdom is no longer applicable because they literally grew up in a different world. So the world in which we had long, predictable life cycles, whether it's for products, for processes, for business practices, or for whole companies, that time is gone. We are collecting now data every year, and I have in front of me data from this year, and I'm looking at the numbers of how often do you need to reinvent to survive, and I'll just give you the latest numbers. About 13% of all the people we polled, and we polled over 2,000 people, about 13% say that today, to survive, they need to reinvent every year. Every year. This is the speed we simply never been prepared to. And then another 33.6% said that they need to reinvent every 2 to 3 years to survive. So this is the world.
Two-thirds.
In which
Wow.
Two-thirds.
Two-thirds.
So now nearly half of all respondents have to reinvent every year, every 2 years, or every 3 years, under 3 years. This is the reality that is not just about the mindset. It's not just about soft issues. This is hard issues. This is how do we budget? This is how do we think about investment? This is how do we think about our product portfolio? This is how do we think about long-term capital expenditures like building a plant? This is a whole new world. And in that sense, you're absolutely right. It's not our fault. It just takes a moment to reframe our understanding of the world as it works.
One of the things that I'm going to tie in that so many of my guests talk about is just this idea of the locus of control. Is it internal? Do we have the agency to proactively beat change to the punch and create a hopeful future in, to some degree according to our own values and how we want it to be? Or are we going to wait and get kind of clocked on the side of the head with the hard realities of life? And again, your quote, when we choose to reinvent ourselves, we earn the right to choose who we want to be. Powerful.
For me, that's the puzzling piece. We know from decades of science that if you want to survive, whether it's in your personal career or personal life, when you know that it's time to change, but you're still too afraid to let go and you're holding on to a job or to a team or to a task or even to a profession that you kind of know is not going anywhere. Or we're talking about business when you are in a segment, in a product line, in a geography, in a pricing or business model that you know is not working, but you're still not doing the change. We know from decades of business, the only time you can do it well is when you are in a good time. The old saying goes, don't fix what's not broken. That is the most dangerous statement today, because we know that if you start fixing it when it's already broken, so this is the life cycle, we go up and we go down. If you start reinventing on the fall, your chances of discovery, there's at least one research shows that your chances of ever recovering to the peak performance is only 10%. If you start fixing it when it's broken, you're done. It's too late. But how do we kind of build the forces, build the energy to reinvent when it's not yet broken, when everything is still good around it? That's the real challenge and the real leadership courage that is needed to make that happen.
This is a little bit of a super contemporary pop culture reference right now that I usually don't make these because I'm not usually on the bleeding edge. But there's a new show. I don't know why it's on National Geographic, but it's called Valley of the Boom. And it's all about Netscape 20 years ago when they did their first IPO. Now, I don't know why it is on National Geographic of all things.
Well, there's geography involved.
I think it's maybe National Geographic has to do business, mini series to stay viable. Maybe they're taking your advice. But anyway, the reason I'm bringing this, the reason I'm bringing this up is because we're seeing what you said about the bosses that grew up in the last century and were business experts in the last century. You actually see that played out, where they had hired in a CEO who was a really good CEO, but he didn't know the internet. And so his mantra was, hey, we have to go 4 years of really solid growth and then we can go public. Everybody else is talking about, no, we need to beat Microsoft. We need to beat this before we get gobbled up. And so you really see that tension being played out. And the amazing thing is this is all stuff that happened 20 years ago. Actually, when I was at Case Western Reserve as an undergraduate over 20 years ago, when Case had the one of the earliest internet systems before it really went public, and they were known for that. And so it's really interesting to see all this played out, see the backstory that's, kind of they're hamming it up, but it's also somewhat accurate and tongue in cheek a little bit. But then you're thinking, man, this was 2 decades ago. So if they were pivoting, my point is, they were pivoting that much 2 decades ago. How much more do we have to hyper pivot now?
We have to. And at the same time, this is a tricky question. Every time I speak about reinvention, somebody comes up in the audience and put the hand up and says, okay, so does it mean that we need to let everything go? For example, take my values. Does it mean that I need to reinvent my values every 3 years or every 2 years or every 1 year? And it's exact opposite, actually. When I see companies that are successful with reinvention are the ones who truly know what can be changed and what is non-negotiable, that is never gonna go away. And I often say that the issue of reinvention, the issue of change, the hardest change issue, or the hardest question of change management is not change, it's continuity. It's not what do we need to change. We all know what we need to change. We're annoyed with it. It's in the hallways. It's in the business meetings. It's everywhere. We know what we need to change because we're fed up with it. The harder question is, what do we keep? How do we not throw a baby with the bathwater? Do we even understand what customers are really buying from us? I had a facilitation session for top management of a very large corporation one time. They are business to business companies, so it's harder for them to nail down what their value proposition is, maybe. I'm making excuses for them right now, but I'm not going to release their name, so I hope nobody's hurt in the process. So I'm facilitating this session, and this is CEO, all the C-suite, and the C-1. And about 40 people in the room. And I asked them, what is the value that you're selling? It was more than 40 minutes in the room and they still didn't have an answer. They don't know. They know what they're selling in form of a product, but the value bought by the customer, is it speed? Is it cost? Is it efficiency? Is it whatever else? What is the value? Not the actual product. These are two different things. I remember the very famous saying from someone that you never really buy hammer and nails. You buy holes in the walls. Mm-hmm. Hammer and nails is just a product, as a solution, but this is not what you're buying. That is the hardest question. What is the value that is non-negotiable? What are we not changing? And that's why reinvention is this beautiful dance between change and continuity.
We've been enjoying this discussion with Nadya Zhexembayeva. Her talk is called Titanic Syndrome, Why Companies Sink and How to Reinvent Your Way Out of Any Disaster. And we're going to be right back with Nadya in just a moment for the Blitz Round. Hey, Talk Universe. I hope you've been enjoying today's episode with today's guest. But you know what? Many people want more than that. Many people that listen to Be the Talk actually want to give a talk. And if that's you, you're not alone. Listen to the rest of this podcast. At the end, I'll have a free resource for you just for listening. And we're back with Nadya Zhexembayeva. It is time for the Blitz Round. I'm going to ask Nadya a series of either or questions related to the preparation and performance of her talk. Are you ready, Nadya?
Absolutely.
All right. First question. Were you invited to speak or did you apply? And you've given 4 TEDx talks at this point, so feel free to...
Every time I was invited to speak.
All right.
And first time I had no clue what I was doing, and it's a bad talk. I was talking about women. Actually, I was way ahead of
that
my
was
time.
the first one.
It was 10 years ago, 2009.
I saw that. And you got up and you basically said, I don't know what to talk about for a specifically women's talk, which is really interesting because it was interesting to me. We're going to take a moment for this because that was very curious because I'm leaning in and my summary of what I thought that you were saying is, your upbringing in the former Soviet Union, there wasn't that much of a difference, and women are going to lead and men are going to lead, and you're just going to get the job done.
Yeah. The surprising thing is that there are many, gifts that Soviet Union gave me. And I am very thankful for my childhood. I have no regrets. I'm very happy that I was born where I was born. I'm sure my parents and grandparents would say differently because they had to suffer and some of them were executed and some of them were in prison. I was not. So by the time I was born, it was not super nice, but there are a lot of beautiful things. And one of those beautiful things is the fact that women were in every way completely equal. So the issue of gender inequality never came up in my life until I moved outside of my country. Now I can see different things showing up in different countries. But that talk, the main thing I wanted to say with that talk is that women don't really speak about themselves much. So the whole question of I have nothing to say about women is an important question. Why? Why do I take it for granted? And why women don't say much about themselves? So that's, but that was a bad talk and I was invited.
Well, I respectfully disagree. And I think it's very empowering. I think, just having this discussion, I think that women all over the world could learn a lot from watching your talk, because how empowering is it in light of Me Too and many of the things that largely Western societies are dealing with right now because of all of the wrong things that have been done. How wonderful for you to have been, at least in your experience, largely free from a lot of that just because of the way that, the equal society. I mean, that's the whole thing, that was everyone is an equal. And in capitalist society, we don't necessarily have equality. And now we've got this massive move towards equality, and we're wrestling with what that really means. So I would respectfully disagree.
Thank you. But that was a long answer to a blitz question. I was invited to all four talks.
Great. Well, are you a memorizer, improviser, or blender?
I used to be an improviser. The very last talk, I actually wrote the talk, but it ended up being blended.
Okay. What's a tip, tool, or technique that helps you?
I like talking to somebody right before getting on stage because I'm insanely nervous right before. So I always have somebody next to me who physically talks. And I also had videographers with me the last 1 or 2 times, which relaxes you anyway because they're good people and you need to say hi to them.
What was the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or right before your talk?
My third talk was in Klagenfurt, Austria. I was talking about sustainability in business and overfished ocean strategy, and my heel, I actually fell through the stage about halfway and
through the stage?
Yeah. And I got stuck and I said, I'm breaking through. And my husband to this day thinks that that's the most beautiful thing I said because I am breaking through quite literally. So he thought that was a beautiful metaphor. But yes, my heel got stuck in the stage. I not fell, but like half of my heel fell through and got stuck.
So you finished the talk shoeless, or
no,
what did you do from there?
It out.
You yanked it out
and joked about it. You can still see it. It's all on tape. It was not cut out. I just said, "Oh, I'm breaking through," and yanked it out.
We've been enjoying this blitz round with Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva, and her talk is called "The Titanic Syndrome: Why Companies Sink and How to Reinvent Your Way Out of Any Disaster." If you want to check out Dr. Nadya's other talks, we will have the links up there at our show notes page at BeTheTalk.com. And we're also going to have a link to Dr. Nadya's website, Chief chiefreinventionofficer.com, chiefreinventionofficer.com. And we're going to be right back in just a moment with Nadya Zhexembayeva's final word of advice. Hey, Talk Universe, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want to give the talk to change the world, but you don't know how or even where to start, no problem at all. Go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted for my new 5-day email course that'll show you how. Absolutely free. Just go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted. And we're back with Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva. It is time for her final word of advice. What is it?
Well, I would borrow from all the amazing people who said it before me. Every century is a different challenge. Our century challenge, and I believe truly, will be reinvention. We are facing the amount of staggering disruptions that I don't know when was the last time they simultaneously were here. Political reinvention, reinvention of our economy as a capitalist society, reinvention in light of technological changes, especially artificial intelligence and robotics, reinvention because of health, reinvention about culture, education. I think this is the time to make reinvention our signature skill of the century. Just 100 years ago, most people did not read or write or count. This century, most of us do. What should be the signature basic literacy skill of 21st century? For me, among the top few, reinvention is top on the list. So that would be my advice. Make it a habit. Make it a natural skill. Do something new every day, and you will be surprised how big that muscle will become.
Well, Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for beautiful conversation.
Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.